Investigators use a range of techniques and types of evidence to solve crimes, including CCTV footage, interrogations, and DNA testing. In some cases, though, they come across a photo that throws the case wide open, and the culprit has no choice but to admit their guilt. Number 10. A homicide case that took place back in 1975 has finally been solved thanks to one single photo that was shown to the man who committed it, and the Howard County Police Department has released details on how this was done. The case started on the 24th of August that year, when 20-year-old Roseanne Sturtz was reported missing by her family. Despite several searches being carried out, her remains would only be found on the 15th of December. The police announced that her body was discovered in a wooded area close to Route 108 in Columbia, Maryland, and when an autopsy was performed, it was determined that her life had been ended by a series of blows to her body. Investigators did all they could to identify Roseanne's attacker, but with no solid evidence being found, her case soon went cold, and it was feared that the culprit would get away with this crime. At the time, they were also dealing with several other cases, since 4 women had been attacked and their lives were ended in Baltimore between 1974 and 1977. Several others reported to the police that they'd been assaulted by that same man. On the 20th of July, 1977, Charles William Davis Jr. was pulled over by police officers while he was driving on the I-95. The 2 officers noticed that his car's license plate did not belong to his Volkswagen Beetle, and they wanted to question the driver. He confessed that he had indeed stolen the plates, but would not elaborate as to why. When the car was searched, a stolen CB radio was found under one of the seats, and Davis was arrested. He then produced a receipt to show that he'd purchased the radio legally, but it was discovered he'd made the purchase with a stolen credit card. It belonged to Carol Willingham, who was one of the women who'd been attacked, and she immediately identified Davis as her assailant. He then confessed to ending the life of a woman named Peggy Pumplin, and when being questioned, he also admitted that he'd attacked and ended the life of another woman, Kathleen Diane Cook. He would eventually be sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, but Roseanne's case still remained unsolved. The case was re-examined every few years, but each time investigators came up empty-handed. They finally got their first break in nearly 5 decades when the case was re-examined again in 2024. On that occasion, they came across evidence that had been lost since the initial investigation, and they realized that Davis was likely responsible for attacking Roseanne. When he was questioned after his arrest decades earlier, he was shown a photo of Roseanne, but he didn't recognize her and claimed he had nothing to do with her homicide. But he did state that he had heard about her case. With the lost evidence recovered, the authorities decided to question Davis once again, and this time he was shown a different photo that showed her face more clearly. Davis immediately recognized her as one of his victims, and he confessed on the condition that he would not be prosecuted in her case. Number 9. Thanks to advancements in photo recognition technology, the homicide case involving 88-year-old Edna Schubert has been solved, and the man responsible for ending her life in North Bay Shore, Long Island, will remain incarcerated for a very long time. On the 12th of December, 2003, Edna's neighbors became concerned when they noticed that her house's front door was slightly ajar, and that they'd not seen her all day. It was also noticed that the house's outside light was still on, and that one of her windows was broken. They decided to investigate, and when they got no answer to their calls at the door, they decided to enter the house. It was found to be in a state of disarray, with papers strewn around the house, but it was only when they walked into Edna's bedroom that they discovered what had happened. Edna was found deceased, and her neighbors immediately notified the police. Upon processing the crime scene, they found a shoe print impression on her neck and face, which revealed that Edna's life had been ended via blunt force trauma. The sole of her attacker's shoe contained a herringbone pattern, and investigators at least had a single clue, but nothing in the house helped them identify her attacker. A coroner added that Edna had sustained several more injuries to the rest of her body, and it was almost certain that she'd been attacked by a man. Pasquale Albergo, one of the detectives working on Edna's case in 2003, grew ever more frustrated at the fact that they couldn't find any evidence as to who had attacked her, and after his retirement, he remained hopeful that emerging technologies would finally bring the culprit to justice. He never stopped thinking about her case, and in 2023, 2 decades after the fact, a breakthrough was finally made. Detectives had decided to take yet another look at the case, and in doing so, scoured through crime scene photos and other items that had been collected from the victim's house. The crime scene photos that had been taken back in 2003 weren't of much help, as many were blurry and out of focus. But they then had an idea that would crack Edna's case wide open. They decided to take a new photo of one of the older photos, and it was sent to a laboratory to be analyzed. With the use of modern technology, it was discovered that the attacker had left a thumbprint in one of Edna's window blinds. It's believed that he cut his hand when he inadvertently broke the window during a struggle, and his print was perfectly preserved in biological material. The print was sent to be analyzed, and the results showed that it belonged to a 51-year-old Raul Ayala, who at the time was 29 years old, unemployed, and living in a house just 200 yards from Edna's place. DNA that was found on Edna's clothes came back as a match to Ayala, who had since relocated to Talmo, Georgia. He was placed under surveillance, and his DNA was secretly collected from his discarded lottery tickets and bottles that he'd been drinking from. Another match was made, and Ayala was arrested. He's currently awaiting trial, but with all of this strong evidence against him, it's believed he'll likely spend most of the remainder of his life in prison. Number 8. Sometimes the smallest detail in a photo can help investigators bring a case to a close. And that's exactly what happened in the case of Paulette Jaster, a Jane Doe who remained unidentified for decades. In 1979, Paulette was 25 years old and living in Davison, Michigan, where she was employed at a Walgreens store. In May of that year, her family became concerned when she failed to come home, and the authorities were notified. A missing person case was opened, and despite several searches being conducted, no one was able to figure out what had happened to Paulette, who'd seemingly vanished into thin air without explanation. Her family informed the police that while Pauline had done very well at school, both academically and as a basketball player, the years following her graduation were exceedingly difficult, as she'd started to show signs of mental health issues. On the 31st of March, 1982, the police were called to the Lake Erie shoreline after members of the public discovered a woman's remains. It was found close to the Edison power plant, and after she was discovered, every effort was made to identify her, but with no clues to follow, the case went cold, and the woman was listed as a Jane Doe. Then in January of 2014, police received an online tip from someone who urged them to compare the Jane Doe to Paulette's case. They decided to follow up on the tip, and using childhood photos of Paulette, forensic anthropologists made a breakthrough after comparing them to Jane Doe's autopsy photos. She discovered that both women had very distinct freckles on their cheeks, and it was almost certain that they were the same person. But the police needed to confirm this before the two cases could be closed. They contacted Paulette's remaining family and managed to collect more photos of her. These only confirmed their suspicions, and at last, the Jane Doe and Paulette were one and the same. Investigators would then reveal that on the day of her disappearance, Paulette had been hitchhiking from Arizona to Houston and had been given a ride by a truck driver. She was dropped off at a truck stop on Interstate 10 on the 28th of March, 1980, but then tragedy struck. Several witnesses would tell the police that they'd seen her get out of the truck, and just seconds later, she was struck by a passing car. The driver failed to stop and raced away from the scene. He was identified as 23-year-old Robert Cowick, who was soon tracked down and arrested. He was charged with failure to stop and render aid, as well as involuntary manslaughter. Number 7. When Brian Wolf decided to forge a photography career, he could never have imagined that he would one day be asked to aid the police in a homicide investigation, or that he would be the one to solve one. The case in question involves 27-year-old Denise Kolb, who was found deceased in a remote wooded area, specifically an undeveloped cul-de-sac off Harvey Road in Birmingham Township, Pennsylvania, on the 12th of November, 1991. When investigators arrived at the scene, they immediately knew Denise was a victim of homicide, since she was dressed in only her sweater, and the rest of her clothing had been placed in a pile on top of her body. Investigators looked into Denise's life to determine who could have had a motive to harm her, but no suspects were identified. They learned that she had moved in with her boyfriend, Theodore Dill Donahue, just a month before her life was ended, and he was questioned. He explained that he worked as a pizza delivery man and that he had not seen Denise since the 18th of October that year, almost a month before she was found deceased. He added that the last time they were together, they'd used illegal substances together, and that they'd been robbed by a man with a sharpened blade. He claimed that following the robbery, Denise ran away from the area to look for help, but she never returned, and he never saw or heard from her again. Denise's family was also questioned, and they revealed that she was present at a funeral the day after the robbery took place. They identified Denise's clothing, which included her sweater, 2 pairs of pants, a jacket, a t-shirt, and 1 yellow sock. When Donahue learned that Denise had been found deceased, he returned all of her clothing that she'd left in their apartment to her family. They were left baffled by the fact that one of her socks was unaccounted for, and when it was found in Donahue's apartment during a search, they became convinced that he was responsible for ending her life. He stated that he didn't know why the sock was in his apartment and that he had nothing to do with her homicide. He was named as a person of interest, and investigators grew ever more suspicious when they discovered that Donahue's email handle was Ted Bundy 1967, which obviously is the name of an infamous serial killer combined with the birth year of Donahue. Donahue cooperated with the police and even called them in the days to follow to hear what her autopsy had revealed, but investigators noted that he was very nervous whenever they interacted with him. No further evidence could be found to tie him to the crime, and for 24 years, Denise's case went cold. In 2015, her case was reopened, and Brian Wolf was asked to take a look at some of the photos that had been taken during the initial investigation. He used modern techniques to enhance many of the grainy photos, and was able to connect the yellow sock found in Donahue's apartment to the one found at the crime scene. Donahue was brought in for questioning, and he confessed that he lied about his interaction with Denise. He admitted that he and Denise had gotten into an argument outside a bar on the 18th of October, 1991, and Denise's sister confirmed this. It was then discovered that he, on occasion, stayed at a motel close to the area where Denise was found. Witnesses would also come forward to report that he'd spoken to them about the case, and that he'd mentioned several details about the crime that had never been made public. Donahue was arrested in 2019, but he passed away while in custody on the 18th of November, 2020, and hence he never faced justice for ending Denise's life. Number 6. In 1980, 22-year-old Laura Kempton relocated from Durham, New Hampshire to Portsmouth, which is only a short distance away. She moved into an apartment on Chapel Street, which suited her well since it was close to Portsmouth Beauty School, where she'd started studying. She had aspirations of becoming a hairdresser and was about to graduate in 6 months' time. Laura was well versed in all things beauty, as she'd worked as a model in the past, so she was ready to start her career in that field. While completing her studies, she'd started a part-time job at Karen's ice cream store, but she also worked at a novelty gift store called Macro Polo. When she wasn't studying or earning extra money, she could be seen enjoying the city's nightlife, attending clubs and restaurants in the area. She'd also started dating a saxophone player called Charlie, who played in a band that often performed at a restaurant called Luca's. On the night of the 27th of September, 1981, it started like any other when Laura went out to the Riverside Club with a few of her friends. There, a man calling himself JR asked her to dance, and she agreed. Following that, they spent more time together at the club, and at closing time they left together and went back to Laura's apartment in her car. They were seen together at around 9:30 the next morning at a deli where they had breakfast. But Laura had to leave shortly after since she was supposed to work a shift at the novelty store, with her shift starting at 10 a.m. That night, she decided to go out again, this time with a friend named Karen Weiss. They had dinner at Luca's, after which they remained at the restaurant, where they danced and spoke to several men. At 1 a.m., they left the restaurant and went their separate ways in front of number 20 Chapel Street. A boy who lived across the street would later report that he saw Laura sitting on her couch with something in her hand that he believed might have been a cookie. He could only see her from behind, as he had a view of her living room from his family's apartment. The following morning, residents of the area were left in shock when Laura was found deceased on her bed with most of her clothes piled on top of her. Her ankles were bound, and biological material was found around the room. The apartment was in disarray, with papers and personal items strewn around. When the clothing was removed from her bed, investigators discovered that a telephone cord had been wrapped around Laura's throat. But it was determined this was not how her life was ended. An empty wine bottle was found next to her bed and was thought to have been used to end her life, as her assailant had used it to strike Laura in the head. Investigators also found a cigarette butt that could have only belonged to her attacker since she didn't smoke. A witness would later come forward to report that she'd seen Laura and an unknown man having a heated argument outside her apartment, but since she didn't recognize him, he was never tracked down or questioned. It was certain that the DNA that they'd found belonged to a man, but the police were unable to match it to a suspect. Laura's case went cold until 2022 when the case was re-examined. The collected DNA was analyzed once more, and this time it was a match to a man named Ronnie James Lee. When the witness who was questioned in 1981 was shown his booking photo from a previous crime, she was able to positively identify him as the man that she saw outside Laura's apartment that night, and it was certain he was the culprit. Unfortunately, Lee had already passed away after ingesting illegal substances, so he was never charged with ending Laura's life. But her case had finally been solved more than 4 decades after it had taken place. Number 5. In March of 1979, Janie Landers, a patient at Oregon Fairview's training center, with the functional level of an 8-year-old, ran away. Center staff, known for treating patients poorly, reported her as a walkaway. Janie had run away before, but this time she didn't return. The last person to see her was a teacher, Bill Graff, around 2 p.m. Another staff member, Leona Weiss, saw Janie speaking to a man by a gold car outside the center around the same time. On March 14th, Janie's body was found in a wooded area. She'd been attacked with a blade and she was struck on the head. The scene suggested she was attacked somewhere else, and she was found clutching a fistful of her attacker's hair, and one of her earrings was missing. Graff passed a polygraph test. Investigators looked into Janie's conflict with her roommate, Cheryl, and Cheryl's boyfriend, Ray, who'd threatened Janie after she burned Cheryl with hot chili, but couldn't link them to the murder. The case went cold, despite a 1981 tip from Cheryl after she and Ray broke up that she saw Janie's missing earring in his truck, which Ray no longer owned. In a 2015 re-examination, an investigator noted in crime scene photos that the attacker's hiltless blade likely cut him. Janie's shirt was analyzed, and the attacker's DNA was matched to Gerald Dunlap, who worked at the center in 1979. Weiss identified Dunlap as the man she saw with Janie. Unfortunately, Dunlap had passed away in prison while serving a life sentence for an unrelated crime. Janie's family was nonetheless relieved that he had at least served time. Number 4. One wonders how some criminals manage to get away with their crimes for as long as they do, since they're often careless about leaving clues behind. And in the more laughable cases, they brag about their misdeeds. Investigators couldn't believe their luck while attempting to find the man who'd robbed 50-year-old Rito Llamas Juarez, as they'd been handed all but everything they needed to bring this attacker to justice soon after the crime was committed. On the 29th of February, 2016, Rito traveled to an apartment complex on the east side of Indianapolis after he'd arranged to buy an iPhone from someone who'd placed an ad on the OfferUp app. Rito and the 2 members of his family traveled to the complex together, likely because they knew these types of transactions are sometimes used by criminals to bait their victims, who are robbed as soon as they arrive for the sale, and they probably felt that they'd be safer as a group of 3. But this was not the case. After they arrived in the 3900 block of North Post Road, Rito and the seller started talking and discussing a price for the phone in question. Suddenly, the man produced a large firearm and told the group to hand over all their belongings, including cash, phones, and anything of value that they were carrying. They did as they were told and hoped that the robber would simply flee once he had taken possession of their valuables. But inexplicably, the man then aimed the firearm at Rito and opened fire, ending his life. One of his family members managed to jump out of the car and managed to make it to safety, while the others started the car's engine and fled as fast as they could, with Rito still in the car with them. The police were called, but Rito could not be saved, and his relatives were unable to provide investigators with the assailant's name, since they'd never met him before, and since he'd likely used a fake name to set up the meeting. In retrospect, the attacker must have soon realized that his crime had not been planned as well as he first believed. Investigators were quickly able to link the OfferUp profile that was used to his Facebook account, and they found a 20-year-old man named Larry Thomas, and they scoured his account for further clues. They didn't have to search long before they found something. Larry, whose Facebook account was registered under the pseudonym Slaughterboy LaRoe, had let his hubris get the better of him, and it led to his downfall. Quite unbelievably, he'd uploaded several photos of himself holding the very firearm that was used to take Rito's life, which matched shell casings that were collected at the crime scene. He was found guilty and sentenced to 55 years behind bars, which means he'll be 75 before he's released. Number 3. In 2012, 30-year-old Amber Coplin met a man named David Kallick in Port Orchard, Washington. The pair seemed to hit it off, and before long, they decided to move into an apartment together, along with Amber's 13-year-old son. Before long, it became apparent to Amber's friends and family that the relationship was not as amicable as it seemed. They described it as rocky at the best of times, and noted that the couple fought frequently. During some of these altercations, their neighbors heard items in the apartment being thrown around and smashed on the floor. Her family also knew that Amber was still technically married to Paul Coplin, from whom she'd been separated for some time. Her son would still spend time with David on occasion though, but their marriage was beyond saving, and so she decided to move on with Kallick, who was thought to have been abusive towards her. On the 4th of November 2014, their arguments came to a head in one of the most tragic ways. Amber's son would report that he heard the couple arguing once again that night, and that it had escalated into a shouting match. This would be confirmed by her neighbors, who reported hearing shouting and banging noises coming from their apartment. The argument eventually died down, and Amber's son went to bed believing that his mother had done the same. When he woke up the next morning, Kallick was gone, and when he left for school, he assumed that Amber was still asleep. That afternoon, he arrived back at the apartment and had a nap. But when he woke up that afternoon, he noticed that Amber's car was no longer parked in its regular spot. He walked into her bedroom and found his mother unresponsive, after which he immediately called his father, Paul. He arrived at the apartment at around 3:30 p.m. and was shocked to realize that Amber was deceased. The boy's father contacted the police and stated that Amber had obviously been badly assaulted, since she had serious injuries to her face and bruising to the rest of her body. That same day, Kallick spoke to a friend of his, stating he would soon read about him in the news, but he declined to elaborate. The police were then contacted by several users of the website 4chan, who directed them to photos that had been uploaded by Kallick. They contained images of Amber's body, as well as the messages that he'd written on the walls and driver's license. Kallick had stolen her car and fled to Portland, but there, a police officer spotted him the next day, and a high-speed chase ensued. The officer was forced to abandon the chase when Kallick started driving erratically, placing the lives of other motorists in danger. But he was later spotted again in Wilsonville and finally taken into custody. It was discovered that he had a long history with the law, as he'd committed several violent crimes in the past, and he was charged with ending Amber's life and sentenced to 82 years behind bars. Number 2. Google Maps, and especially its Street View function, are useful tools for anyone who's planning to travel to an unexplored destination, since it gives them a recent view of the area, along with directions on how to get there. But in the case of mafia boss Gioacchino Gamino, It served as a tool for investigators to track him down and to take him into custody for the array of crimes that he was involved in for more than 2 decades before he was arrested. A warrant for his arrest was issued in 2014 after he was named as one of Italy's most wanted dangerous criminals. He'd been implicated on several murders, some of which he'd been convicted of, and at one point it was believed he'd fled to Spain to evade capture, but still he could not be located. By December of 2017, Gamino must have felt he'd successfully evaded the law, since he'd been on the run for 20 years, with the police never having even come close to finding him. He'd seemingly severed all ties with the Agrigento Mafia clan in Sicily, and he'd put their feud with the Cosa Nostra well behind him. He'd been arrested twice after being implicated in the assassination of a judge called Giovanni Falcone, who stood firm against the Mafia. He was arrested again in '98 and found guilty of ending someone's life while being suspected of several more similar attacks, and he was handed a life sentence. In 2002, though, he escaped from prison while a movie was being filmed there, and he remained elusive until December of 2021, when investigators got a break they could have never expected. It remains unknown what prompted them to do so, but that year, anti-mafia investigators in Sicily decided to use Google Maps Street View in an effort to track Gamino down. They were still certain he'd relocated to Spain, and quite unbelievably, their efforts soon paid off. They found a Street View photo of a man fitting Gamino's description standing outside the El Huerto de Manu fruit and vegetable store in the town of Galapagar, talking to another man who was likely a patron of the store. As most of us know, anyone who's captured on Google Maps Street View has their faces blurred before the images are uploaded, so it could not be immediately confirmed that the man was Gamino. But they found photos from the Facebook profile of a restaurant near the fruit and vegetable store. The restaurant owner had uploaded several photos of his diners throughout the years, one of which was Gamino, whose face was clearly visible. He was arrested and then admitted that he'd been living in Spain under the name of Manuel, and that he was the owner of a fruit and vegetable store. Gamino was later found guilty of all charges against him and is currently serving a life sentence. Number 1. In 2020, 43-year-old former police officer John Hardy, owner of an HVAC business, and his 48-year-old business partner Garrett Wilson were reported missing. Hardy had earlier reported $80,000 missing from the business accounts, implicating Wilson, who'd started delegating duties after Hardy's leg injury. Hardy claimed Wilson completed unreported jobs, and the funds were unaccounted for. After Wilson was reported missing, Hardy posted on Facebook that his partner would be okay. Wilson's photo was found near the Flat River Bridge. On February 19th, Hardy disappeared. 2 days later, Wilson's remains were found in a burn pile on a Bossier Parish hunting lease near Rocky Mount. The killer had attempted to dispose of the body by fire, unaware of the nearby trail cameras. Within 24 hours, camera photos identified Hardy standing near the burn pile, with Wilson's clothing visible. Hardy was arrested on Kings Highway in Shreveport in a newly purchased van, found with bladed weapons used to end the life of Wilson. Charged with second-degree murder, Hardy was deemed incompetent to stand trial and was sent to a mental health facility in Jackson, Louisiana, where he assaulted an officer. He's awaiting trial pending a mental health assessment. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.